Hi, I'm Sara Maxana, and I've lived in Northwest Seattle for the last 11 years. I recently bought a really great 2-bedroom brick Tudor. It's about a half-mile from downtown Ballard, and I live there with my 2 children. One of them's over there, who go to school in nearby Wallingford, and they play Ballard soccer and Ballard Little League in our neighborhood parks. And under the proposals being discussed here tonight, my block could become part of the Ballard Hub Urban Village and be rezoned to allow multifamily housing. And I want to share with you a little bit why I'm okay with that. My home was appraised last week, and it showed an increase in value of nearly 20% in the less than 15 months that I've owned it. Now, I'm really grateful that I can afford to live in a nice house in a great neighborhood, and I'm glad that my investment is growing. But I really haven't put sweat equity into that house. Its value has skyrocketed because we have a housing shortage in this city that is driving up the value of all of our existing homes. And while that benefits me as a homeowner, it's hurting others. It's pushing up rents across the city and pricing people out of ownership. And I don't see why one class of people, homeowners, should be getting a windfall from the same phenomenon that is causing other people in Seattle to struggle. I don't think that's okay. But I'm not going to pretend this is all altruistic either. I do have a personal motive here because I'm looking at my kids, and this housing shortage affects them. It's going to make it harder for them to afford to live here where they grow up. And I think, like any parent in this room, I want my kids to have the choice to live in Seattle. And so I'm excited that some of these HALA proposals are going to help bring more housing choices to Seattle, especially affordable choices. I'm particularly excited about what it might mean for urban villages like mine, because I know that it is possible to weave multifamily housing into our neighborhoods and still have great communities. Where I grew up on the north side of Chicago, where duplexes and triplexes, and we called them 2 flats and 3 flats, and low-rise apartment buildings mingled effortlessly with single-family homes, block after block, and some were owner-occupied and some were rentals, and they provided housing diversity throughout the city, on quieter residential streets, with wonderful neighborhood character near parks and good schools. And I can tell you from my own life experience that that makes a huge difference. I spent a good chunk of my childhood in multifamily housing. And the first one that we lived in was at the corner of Irving and Western, for anyone that knows Chicago. It's kind of like 15th and Market. And there was a gas station at the base. And you know, when I was in my 20s, it was cool to live in places like that. But at 10, there was no yard, there was no place to play. But our second apartment was in a 3-story walk-up at the intersection of 2 quiet neighborhood streets, and it had a small front yard, and it had room for a veggie garden for my mom in the back, and I could ride my bike on the street. And my grandparents and cousins lived in a 2-flat down the block, and my best friend lived in a single-family house around the corner. And it worked for everyone. There were choices there. In the same neighborhood, there were housing choices for my grandparents on a fixed income, choices for my single mother trying to rent a place with her 2 kids, and then later on, when she was able to afford a house, there were choices in that neighborhood for her to buy a house. And then for me, fresh out of college, working in social services, there were choices for me when I tried to find an apartment to rent. But in Seattle, we relegate multifamily housing largely to arterials and near freeways, rather than integrated into our neighborhoods. And yes, we have a lot of capacity to build more big buildings on all of our arterials, and that's important, and I would have loved some of those apartments 20 years ago, but is that the right capacity for all of our housing needs? Because for me, 4 years ago, when I became a newly single mom and I was looking for a place in Ballard to rent with my 2 kids, you know, there were a lot of apartments on busy streets or really expensive single-family houses. There just weren't a lot of choices. And so I think having more flexibility in our urban villages are going to create some of those choices. And I want those choices. I want the choice of building a unit on my own property that could generate income, or maybe where my kids could live or my parents could live. I want housing choices for myself as my income and my housing needs change as I age. And I want more housing choices for my children when they grow up and start households of their own. And so I'm excited about HALA and the possibility of some of these choices in Seattle. I think we should share the benefits of living in this great city, and I'm looking forward to being a part of that process. Thank you.